I'm speaking with Mark Prentice, Communications Director for the No on 2117 campaign and founder of Union Street Strategies. Mark has served as a senior advisor and strategist for public figures, elected officials, winning candidates, philanthropists, nonprofit leaders, and private sector innovators, including the mayor of Seattle, Microsoft founder Paul G. Allen, and former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. His public service includes serving in the U.S. House of Representatives as the press secretary and speechwriter for Congresswoman Nita Lowey, while she served as the top-ranking Democrat on the House Appropriations Committee. Born, raised, and educated in Washington State, Mark's roots in the Pacific Northwest go back 3 generations. One side hails from the orchards of the Yakima Valley, the other from the mossy woods of the Cascade Foothills. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it, Amanda.
So we're here today to talk about Initiative 2117, which will be on the ballot in Washington State this November, and why we should be voting no on this initiative. So to start off, what exactly is Initiative 2117?
Yeah, I think there are 3 things to know about Initiative 2117 that's on our ballots this fall. I think the first thing to know is it's a really deceptive initiative. It makes false promises to Washingtonians. It was written to be intentionally confusing. And the people behind it are misleading Washingtonians all across our state. The second thing to know about it is who opposes it. As of yesterday, so I'm really glad we're connecting today as we record this, but as of yesterday, there's now over 500 organizations across our state who oppose 2117. And that runs the gamut. It is a really, in the history of our state, it is a really unprecedented historic coalition. So this is a coalition of firefighters, the Washington State Council of Firefighters, the Washington State Medical Association, the Washington State Nurses Association. It is the majority of the federally recognized tribal nations here. It is small businesses. It is large employers and companies around the state. It is environmental groups and conservation groups. It is labor unions, and it's community organizations, and it's thousands of people. And so that, I think the first thing to know is this, or the second rather, is that there's a unprecedented coalition of people who are working to defeat 2117. And the reason that you see this coalition coming together is the third thing, which is the incredible harm and damage it's going to do to our communities around the state. 2117 would, at the highest level, do 2 things. It would allow more pollution and the threats to health that come with that. And it's going to decimate our state's transportation system. And that includes our investments that we need to make in our ferry system, which I know we'll talk more about. But at the highest level, I think the 3 things to know are: it is a deceptive initiative, it's opposed by a historic coalition, and it's going to allow more pollution here in our state.
That's all really helpful. And, full disclosure, the Whidbey Environmental Action Network is one of the members of the coalition.
And we're so excited about that. Thank you for your support. The
initiative itself, it is going to be harmful. It's totally, being backed by a group that has obviously special interests and that will benefit from the passing of the initiative. But as far as I understand the initiative itself, it would repeal parts of the Climate Commitment Act, correct?
Yes. And it would not only repeal parts of what is our state's landmark clean air law, the Climate Commitment Act, it also would handcuff our policymakers and legislators in Olympia from establishing a similar law in the future. So it's not only taking away the cap on pollution and taking away these investments in our communities, but it's actually preventing the state from acting in the future.
my understanding is that what 2117 is specifically targeting is the cap and invest program outlined in the Climate Commitment Act, which sets a limit or a cap on overall carbon emissions in the state and requires businesses to obtain allowances equal to their covered greenhouse gas emissions specifically. Is that, and I was looking at the Department of Ecology website, and they were talking, they specifically are the ones that administer this cap and invest program. And I think according to the Climate Commitment Act, as it's currently written, businesses can obtain allowances through quarterly auctions hosted by the state or bought and sold in a secondary market like stocks and bonds. And the idea is that the cap for emissions will be reduced over time, to assure that Washington is achieving its emissions reduction goals over the next, basically 30 years, like 2030, 2040, 2050. I think, according to the Department of Ecology, the state cap and invest program covers roughly 75% of statewide emissions. So, covering businesses that exceed 25,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year, and covering business types that are included but not limited to fuel suppliers, natural gas and electric utilities, waste to energy facilities, starting in 2027, and then railroads in 2031. So it's hugely impactful, right? Like this particular program that was passed as a part of this larger Climate Commitment Act in 2021. And so I'm curious who the person is and who the group is behind Initiative 2117 or 2117 and why they're trying to get rid of this program.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the group that is the driving force behind Initiative 2117 and several other extreme initiatives that are on the ballot this year is an organization that's relatively new in the state called Let's Go Washington. Mm-hmm. And the main person behind Let's Go Washington and the main funder is a gentleman named Brian Haywood. Mm-hmm. And Brian Haywood is a hedge fund owner. Mm-hmm. And millionaire. He is from California originally. And he has invested over $6 million of his own money in putting these initiatives on the ballot. And so sort of setting up the campaign, sort of apparatus, writing these misleading initiatives, and then paying to get them put on the ballot through signature gathering and other activities. He is, as the Seattle Times put it in a profile of him earlier this year, pretty aptly, I think they called him Tim Eyman with a gigantic bank account. And so he's putting that bank account to work with 2117. He is, in many ways, the face of the initiative. And the second part of your question of, why would he do that? I think it's a great question. I think, why would someone propose a plan to roll back our clean air and clean water protections? Why would you propose a plan that has the effect of cutting $5 billion from our transportation funding? Mm-hmm. Why would you propose a plan that cuts funding for wildfire prevention when we know we're all seeing the impacts of more severe and more frequent wildfires in our state? Mm-hmm. So, the list goes on, unfortunately. Why would you propose something like that? And why would you propose something like that without coming up with any other solutions as well? And I think that's a really important point to emphasize is, it's really easy to go to go out to Washingtonians and mislead the public and say we need to get rid of this thing. But especially when you're rolling back protections for clean air and for water and for our forests and our farmlands as well, to then, not have any other solution. I think I don't have a good answer as to why he would do that.
I guess that's a
but
question for him. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he will come on sometime. But I think we we sort of, regardless of his motivation, I do think, we do know some of the pretty specifically some of the impacts of his plan, and they would do a lot of harm to our state and to your region as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me how much transportation is a part of what would be kind of impacted by this initiative. Specifically, I know our ferry systems, right, like would be greatly impacted. And I know that according to the Climate Commitment Act, I think like $1 billion at least worth of funding was going to go towards, or is supposed to go towards, the electrification and hybridization of our ferry system. And so I'm very curious, like what the coalition kind of sees as the impact to transportation, in the state, and then specific as it pertains to, Island County and kind of these communities that like utilize ferries in order to be in contact with the world.
Yeah. So there, again, unfortunately, there's a lot to say on this topic as far as how 2117 would hurt our transportation system. It does it in a couple ways. But the sort of, the highest level is it cuts about a third of the funding, or about $5 billion for our statewide transportation plan. And that's a multi-year plan. It's called Move Ahead Washington. And Move Ahead Washington funds everything from, it was passed by the legislature in 2022, and it funds everything from major road and bridge infrastructure projects to sidewalks, to the program called Safe Routes to School, which funds things like signage and crosswalks within a certain vicinity of a K through 12 school. And so it's hugely important to keeping our state moving, keeping, whether you are a agricultural producer in Eastern Washington, or you're a commuter, or you are a small business that needs to be able to get on the ferry to go service another small business or supply another small business in Island County, it impacts everyone. So it devastates funding for transportation. And then it also cuts funding for things like expanding public transit. And then you mentioned this already, but electrification for both ferries as well as electric vehicles. Like, for example, it would cut funding for more electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which we know is really, really important to putting more clean vehicles on our road and helping meet our clean transportation goals as a state. And then there's, so the ferries piece is unfortunately really, really concerning. So I think, as Island County residents know better than anyone, our ferry system is in crisis, and we've known that for a while. We have an aging fleet that needs to be modernized. Vessels need to be replaced. And we also know that we need to reduce the impact of our transportation sector on pollution overall, and that includes ferries. And so there is a plan in our state to, as you mentioned, electrify our fleet and purchase new vessels. And the net effect of Initiative 2117 would be it would take away about 25% of the cost of each new ferry. So, wow. So in the ferry system is facing, and they just gave a presentation about this just last week to leaders in the legislature about, they have a long-term funding gap as it is for them to really be able to expand the fleet, maintain the levels of service, grow the levels of service, maintenance, staffing, all of those things. And 2117 just takes a digs that hole even deeper for our ferry system. So it would have tremendous impacts sort of up and down the ferry system and up and down our transportation system.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, out here, anecdotally, we experience that the kind of stress of the ferry system already because, sometimes usually the Mukilteo Clinton pathway or whatever, we have two ferries in operation, and usually when it's going well, we have two 145 car ferries. And when it's not, we're down to one ferry. And now we're down to, smaller vessels because, they had to take one of our ferries and put it in another location and operate it elsewhere because of the shortage. There's a shortage of workers. There have been, over different periods of time, and then also a shortage of vessels. So not only, is it like necessary for us to be able to update the ferries that we have, but even just having enough in operation for the current usage is, an issue. And so it's very concerning for anyone to be trying to pass an initiative that would cut funding to an already strapped system in our state. I think I'm curious from an environmental standpoint, what the impacts of the passing of 2117 would be.
Those impacts would be devastating and would amount to real threats to health around our state. We mentioned it a minute ago, but the 2117 would remove the cap on pollution that we have in place. And so what that means, it would allow more pollution. So, and that is going to have real health impacts. It would also cut funding for preventing wildfires. And we know that air quality is a global crisis, but also a crisis here, especially as it relates to wildfires. So it cuts funding for forest health programs that help make our forests more resilient to severe wildfires through doing things like thinning out a forest. It also cuts funding for a program that is so important for a lot of landowners around the country, a program called around the state called Firewise, which helps incentivize local governments as well as private landowners to make their lands more resistant to severe fire and help prevent fires. And we all know the impact that wildfires have on health. It would, again, you'll hear me say this a lot, but the list goes on. It would cut funding for planned projects to upgrade ventilation systems in buildings, including schools around the state, including tribal schools. So think about schools that have really outdated heating and air conditioning systems or HVAC systems that can be modernized so that the air in those buildings is cleaner. It also has the added effect of helping those buildings be much more energy efficient, which that also helps, like a school district, for example, lower its energy costs over time. It would cut funding across all those areas. It even stops the expansion of our regional air quality monitoring network. So over decades here, we've been building a network of monitoring sites that give us here in the state sort of real-time information about the air around us and what the health risks are, and whether you are a parent with a young child or an frontline worker who works outdoors, or an educator, or you have someone in your life or yourself has respiratory issues like asthma, for example, that provides real-time information so that you can make the best decision for you and your family about what is safe about being outside or not. And one of the things that 2117 does is it stops the expansion of that network. So it has these overlapping cascading impacts all across our state, and it would mean more pollution in our air, and there is unfortunately a whole host of data that shows that increases asthma rates, and not just asthma, but issues like heart disease as well. 1 in 10 kids in Washington State have asthma, and so I think this is going to hurt them, and that's the bottom line, and it's going to hurt all of us, but especially those who are most at risk. And I mentioned this earlier, but that's why you see healthcare professionals all across our state who are opposing 2117. Doctors and nurses and public health experts are all united in opposition to 2017 for a lot of reasons, one of which is the impact to health that is and the harm to our health that would come from it.
Yeah. That's really helpful to think about, just like the ways in which all of the programs that are designed to help keep our air clean, and also to create energy efficiency across industry would be impacted. I also know that fish habitat is one of the things that would also be impacted by this. That's true, right?
That is true. The 2117 would cut funding for stream, lake, and river health programs, and fish habitat programs, and salmon recovery. And it does that in a couple ways. One is there are a number of programs that would lose all of their funding if 2117 passes, that are programs that are focused on healthy fish habitat. So, for example, there are programs that incentivize like farms, for example, that have streams, salmon bearing streams on their lands to plant native vegetation along the banks of that river or that stream, because that promotes a healthier ecosystem for fish. We also know that there are a number of fish barriers around our state that are really critical. To removing those is absolutely vital to our salmon recovery here in the state. And a lot of those, the investments to remove those fish barriers and create a more natural habitat for fish and salmon, lose funding. Our campaign, we were just in Snohomish County yesterday. I'm sure many of you and your listeners who have driven along I-5 through Everett, just really close to the Highway 2 trestle. Just to the east of I-5 is a place called Spencer Island, which is an estuary, and that is just an example. There's a active restoration project there to help the salmon population recover there. And the 2117 there's currently $500,000 planned to go into that estuary program, and 2117 would take all that away. And so we were there yesterday with fisheries biologists and tribal leaders and local experts talking about the harm and sort of highlighting that as an example of the harm that it would do to fish habitat. And unfortunately, the examples abound. As we look towards the northwest part of the state, in and around Island County, there's especially throughout Whatcom and Skagit, there are over 8 different restoration projects that are planned that would lose 100% of their funding.
Wow. So yeah, so huge impacts to salmon recovery, which I think it's one of those things, like, as you're telling me all of these kind of budgetary losses that would result from 2117, it seems to me that the strategy of the initiative is to just cut funding for everything that would progressively be moving the state towards better energy efficiency, cleaner air, cleaner water, and habitat restoration.
That's certainly the effect that it would have. And that's, again, that's the only guarantee of what they are proposing. And sort of taking that all away without a plan for doing, replacing those investments, right, whether it's in fish habitat or the ferry system. And I think that's really, really, that's really dangerous for our state.
I agree. Is there anything else the initiative is targeting that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, we've talked about, I think, a lot of the major impacts. It would, I think, we talked about transportation and the ferry system. We've talked about clean air programs. We talked about river and stream health, fish habitat. And I know a minute ago we talked about cutting the funding for wildfire prevention. And so, as we all know, all those things they're all connected. And so I think when you look at the total impact, it's going to make our state a less healthy place to live. It's going to increase commute times. It's going to put our strained ferry system under even more stress. And so, the impacts are really, statewide too. And I think that's really important, is when and when you literally kind of map all these investments that are going to get taken away, they are all over our state. And everything from transportation projects to fish barrier removals. And so the harm is really statewide.
Yeah. I mean, from a local perspective, I would say, transportation wise, like, Island County is obviously impacted by the ferry system, but also public transit in general. We actually have a group on the island called Would Be Climate Action that scheduled a public transit day, actually this past Tuesday, to have a bunch of community members take the ferry from Clinton to Mukilteo and then ride the 117 bus, which goes from Mukilteo to Linwood. And gives us a direct transport there. And so they were highlighting public transportation infrastructure and the importance of using public transportation. And, of course, that line could potentially be impacted, by this initiative. Island County is also salmon estuary territory. We receive, salmon, I think, down from the Skagit River, and we don't have any rivers, but we have lots of streamlets, and we have salmon habitat for baby salmon here. We also, experience, air quality degradation from wildfires. I mean, everybody across the state does. If there's a fire somewhere and the wind blows in your direction, it's really helpful to have, air quality alert systems that let you know, like, what is the quality of the air in my region at any given moment. And we just had a conference a few weeks ago on wildfire here on Whidbey, and one of the representatives from the Whidbey Conservation District is also our FireWise representative. And so they gave a talk on how community members can keep their homes safe from wildfire, specifically, as it relates to that program that you mentioned. And so, I feel like on a very microscopic level, the people here in our county are going to be impacted by everything you've said, including, the wanting to expand electric vehicle stations. We've talked about that. Our Economic Development Council has talked about,
Yep.
we need to have more electric vehicle stations on the island so that people, so tourism can happen in a way that is moving forward with energy efficiency and climate change in mind, and so it's really, it seems very imperative to not only keep all of the programs that we have, but expand those programs, not cut their funding.
Yeah. I could not agree more. And I think, to your point, all these investments across our state are connected. A wildfire east of the mountains can and has and will impact air quality in Island County, and the health of a salmon stream, that drains into the Skagit, as you like, for example, that's going to impact our salmon population in the Sound and throughout Island County. And these are all connected. And I think it's also important to note that, we talked about the impacts to health is 2117 would hurt those who are most impacted by pollution and who feel the disproportionate impacts of pollution. And it does a lot of harm to overburdened communities. So communities that suffer from air quality threats through industrial pollution, or they're located next to major highways, for example. And a lot of the funding that 2117 would take away is focused on supporting those communities who are most impacted. So it would 2117 would really widen a lot of the inequities we see in access to clean water and clean air and transportation and on down the list. So I think, it's really important to acknowledge that. And that's one of the reasons that this is 2117 is such a threat to our state.
Yeah. So you mentioned when we first chatted about this, how confusing the initiative is on the ballot. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so it's intentionally confusing. And I think, we as a campaign have talked to voters all across the state, and we hear that over and over, is that it's written in a way that it's not clear sort of what you're voting for. But I think I want to be on our end clear, vote no on 2117. When you vote no, you are voting against removing protections for clean air and clean water, investments in transportation. But the opposition and the hedge fund owner behind this, I think that is part of their strategy, is to create confusion, and to write an initiative that is, the language of it is very hard to understand. So there is some confusion, but I think, again, my single message is to your listeners is to vote no. And if you go to no2117.com, you can learn a lot more about a lot of things we've talked about already. So our coalition, as I mentioned, over 500 organizations. Also, some of these specific impacts, like to the transportation system and ferries that we discussed. We also have information on some of the specific impacts to the Island County, Skagit and Whatcom County region as well. And we also have a lot of information about ways to get involved and help defeat 2117.
Yep. I know that there are opportunities to, call. I know there are opportunities to go door to door. I know there are opportunities to share information with your network and your community. And I agree that the message of this podcast is vote no on
Yes.
2117 this November. Also vote no on 2066 as well. I know for us, we're also a part of the coalition voting no on 2066.
Yep.
So I guess before I guess I have a couple more questions for you. One of them is, you mentioned to me that there was a lawsuit that was filed by Let's Go Washington to prevent the disclosure on the ballot of what the actual impacts of this initiative will be. And I wonder if you could kind of share what that's about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this speaks to the deception that is happening with 2117. So we have a law in our state that is aimed at providing transparency to voters. And it is a law that requires, when there is an initiative like this one on the ballot that impacts our budget, that those impacts are outlined. Because again, 2117 removes investments in things like transportation and clean air programs and clean water programs. And so this is I think a good law. It promotes transparency and helps voters navigate these really important decisions. And so along with Mr. Haywood, the other sort of co-sponsor of the initiative is a state representative, Jim Walsh. He's also the chair of the Washington State Republican Party. He filed a lawsuit earlier this year his goal was to prevent that statement, which is called, the fancy term is called the Public Investment Impact Disclosure Statement.
Okay.
He argued in his lawsuit that law did not apply in this case, and therefore that statement should not be included on voters' ballots. And that it's clear that was part of an attempt to hide the impacts of what they're proposing. And but fortunately, that attempt was denied by a judge in Thurston County Superior Court, and but they then appealed to the state Supreme Court, and it was unanimously turned away. So the good news, what the end result is that statement will appear on our voters' ballots. That does transparently talk about the impacts, and what it's going to say is this measure would decrease funding for, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the exact wording, but this measure would decrease funding for transportation, clean air programs, river, stream, lake health, and wildfire prevention. So it's important that voters have access to that information. And so fortunately, their attempts to hide that failed.
That's good news, actually, that, that the public impact investment disclosure statement will be on the ballot.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else that you think the public should know specifically about this initiative?
I think it's really important to know that this is going to be a tough race. And so I think for your listeners who are really concerned about the harm of 2117 and are going to be voting no, thank you is I guess the first thing. And the second thing is anything that, we really need to defeat 2117. And so anything that people can do to help support our campaign No on 2117. I'm going to do my plug here again, no2117.com. There's so many opportunities to volunteer if as folks are able. You mentioned some of them, but we have an incredible grassroots organizing team and program, and we're working with our partners, organizations all across the state, members of our coalition, and we are meeting with their community members. We are knocking on doors. We are making phone calls. We are doing text banking. We have an incredible youth organizing committee. We have full-time field organizers on the ground across the state. And so we have to talk to as many voters as we can. And we have to outwork our opposition. And so we have an incredible group of over 1,000 volunteers across the state, really active volunteers. And we are always really, really excited to have new volunteers who want to be part of this coalition to defeat 2117. As always, investing in our campaign is hugely helpful and much appreciated. You can also go to our website and endorse No on 2117. And then I think another really critical part is just doing whatever you can in your community to help raise awareness of 2117 and the harm, whether that is posting on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. Those are the two of the main ones, and YouTube, and just sharing our post or doing a social media post. Sending an email to your network, whatever that may look like. I always, I have a text chain with my family. And so I have a text chain with, my college friends, and I've been sharing information there. And so anything like that, especially as, I know your listeners are so incredibly engaged in these issues, and certainly people in their broader network see them as really thoughtful, educated, informed, voters on this. That anything that you can do to just share that information directly in your community is really valuable.
I appreciate that. That's a really good call to action. And I think that anybody who's listening to this podcast should share this with everyone in their network who's a registered Washington voter. That's my hope, to drop this link in every chat. and if people want to know, a brief rundown of what exactly this initiative is, I'm hoping that this episode can serve as that for podcast listeners across the state. Of course, like we have been sharing with our network, and will continue to do so. I love the social media packaging that the campaign has done, making it really accessible for everybody who's a part of the coalition to be able to share graphics without having to create them themselves. I attend all of the coalition, meetings, the updates, and I just think that the campaign is doing such an incredible job of coordinating everybody across a variety, 500 organizations. That's a lot of people to be, organizing together. And I think that the messaging is really clear. And so I think that, I just appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work that everyone at No on 2117 has been doing.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate your support as part of our coalition. We have an incredible team, and everyone is working really, really hard. And we have incredible volunteers and community leaders. And ballots get mailed out in 21 days as of this taping. And they will get mailed out on October 18th and start showing up in our mailboxes. And so this is the time. Yeah. This is the time. Yeah.
Yeah. To shift a little bit, I wanted to just talk to you about your relationship with Island County and Camino Island, because you mentioned that you've spent a lot of time out here.
I have been really lucky to spend a lot of time out there. I spent a large portion of my childhood on beautiful Camino Island, on the southwest side of the island. My late grandparents, who lived in Seattle, they in the late 70s bought a incredible piece of land on Camino Island. And they started just camping on it. And then they had an old trailer that they parked on it. And then eventually my grandfather with his brothers built a house there. And so I grew up just about an hour south in Snohomish County. And so I didn't know how lucky I was as a young kid, but I had amazing, connection to the region and to the island and to the county. I spent many happy days with my grandparents up on Camino Island, and we caught salmon and we played in the woods and we went crabbing. And that was where I really, I think, through my grandparents, learned about, the importance of protecting our environment and our lands and our waters, and remain, really, really grateful for that. And just to have had the chance to spend so much time, on Camino Island. And I always, we joke in our family that as a little, 5-6-year-old, I thought that that's what everyone got to do when they were a kid. And it was a magical place for our family, and it still is today. And it's one of the many beautiful places in our state that we need to protect.
Yeah, I think our listeners from Camino will be very happy to hear you shouting them out, because I know they often feel like they're left out of the conversation. So, we're part of the same county, but it takes me 2 hours to drive over. Yeah. And so it's such a funny little thing, but it's a beautiful place. And I've been spending more time there myself, to connect with community members there and environmentalists that are there. So,
well, every morning at my grandparents' house, we would wake up and look across the Saratoga Passage over to beautiful Woodby. So,
okay. One last question. I'm really curious how you got involved in this type of work.
I think a lot of it goes back to my experiences growing up here and on Camino Island with my grandparents, and having this incredible opportunity being born and raised here to explore our state and to spend time in the mountains and in our waters. And I gained, I think, a firsthand sort of appreciation for our environment and how fragile and special it is. And so as I grew up, I eventually decided to devote a lot of my career to protecting our environment, whether that's working on advocacy campaigns or working for candidates who are leaders and protecting, our clean air and our clean water. And so I've been really fortunate to have a chance to sort of work professionally in this space, and to work with a really amazingly talented, tireless people who are also share those same values and same goals. And I think, fortunately, with No on 2117, as I look across not just our team, but our coalition, I get to work with really incredible people. So I feel grateful for that opportunity.
Well, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and the work that you're doing. And to remind everybody, vote no on 2117 this November. Go to the is it no on 2117.com or no 2117?
No2117.com.
So go to no2117.com to find out ways that you can participate in this campaign. And when you get your ballot, on October 18th and beyond, make sure to vote no on this initiative. I think that's it. Thank you so much. And hopefully in the first week of November, we'll be celebrating.
We're going to keep working hard all the way through.
Another man up in the pulpit in the state house, head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every warm gun, every profit, and kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs, running backwards. So just keep moving, just keep moving. just keep moving, unlearning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEAN's Executive Director Marnie Jackson and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician and WEAN board member Nathaniel Talbot for letting us use his track Intuition from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
Every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hands. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, the straight logic of compassion. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard facts. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. I just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Stepping out of the shadow of a false man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story, recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold